Embrace yourself, comrades. He's big, gnarly, and...
ugly.
Ugly? That does it!
Hello everyone, Obscure Titan here with another essay on Megatronic Legacy. You all might remember me discussing how Spyro could be written in the upcoming series I have in mind for the remainder of the 2020s. This time, we look at the nasty arch-villain of the PS1 game in 1998. We take on Gnasty Gnorc. Since he's only appeared in 2 games, 4 if you count the remastered games such as Reignited Trilogy and Nitro Fueled, I'll start with the first game and then go into a hero's tale. There is Crash on the Run, even though I never played it. I'll also briefly discuss the Cold War aspects during the conception segment, since I did touch on it on my Spyro video, where Gnasty works with the Soviet Union and how that can be utilized in the first entry. Let's get started. The game starts off with the dragons talking about their homeworlds, the amount of gems, and a bit of info on Gnasty Gnorc. One dragon, who happens to be Lindar, answers the reporter's question and called him
ugly.
This sets off Gnasty and begins to turn all dragons into crystal statues. That is except for Spyro. Due to the purple dragon size, he was able to miss the Gnorc's wrath and sent out to free the dragons. The game ends with Spyro roasting him twice and disappears. The real ending after clearing his loot is where his crystal beam shot into 2 dragons playing basketball as Spyro was talking to the reporter. According to the Spyro fandom wiki, Gnasty Gnorc is intelligent and very scheming, having shown his execution on his plot to rule the Dragon Realms by freezing their civilians effortlessly. His ugliness, mean-spirited nature, and greed are his downsides, and absolutely despises dragons. Extremely cowardly, he runs at even the slightest bit of danger, say if a kitten shows up to chew on his toes, then he sprints for his life. This characterization is often overlooked regarding to his screen time. Gnasty only appears in the beginning and end of the first game. Despite this, he seems to be a formidable threat to the dragons. He was only referenced in Ripto's Rage, Year of the Dragon, and Enter the Dragonfly on a few occasions. But had I known, he'd make a comeback. But with a cost. Gnasty Gnorc returns as a boss in A Hero's Tale in 2004, which would have been 6 years since his very first appearance on the 32-bit console. He acts as a henchman to the evil dragon Red. Yes, that Red. How many of them are there? And is in charge of the Dragon Realms with dark gems implanted. Once 10 dark gems are destroyed, Spyro can proceed inside the cave Gnasty went into and fight. Gnasty comes off as a brutish and brave brawn, but this is where his intelligent aspect is absent, even going as far as declaring to be the one who defeated Spyro, only the latter won over the former, indicating that Gnasty is very dim-witted and clueless.
You did? Really? I don't remember that at all. Man, I guess it really has been a while.
Though it is a longer fight and accompanied by a suit of metallic armor, he can still be defeated by roasting his underpants after slamming his mace onto the ground. 3 times at a time, mind you. This is a far cry from the PS1 incarnation. Brave and bold, but dumb. He isn't seen again after his defeat and can't be revisited afterwards. Unless if you create a new save or keep a save file for it without progressing. I haven't played Crash on the Run, but I'll briefly touch on this one. Following the defeat of Nefarious Trophy, a portal was left open to the Dragon Realms. This allowed both Gnasty and Dark Spyro to invade Crash Bandicoot's universe and dominate 3 of Spyro's themed lands. The purple dragon followed them shortly after, but the portal to the Dragon Realms broke off afterwards. Crash and Coco eventually defeat Dark Spyro and seal them away. However, Gnasty Gnorc is still running amok in Crash's homeworld. His design and personality is largely the same as his Reignited one. I discussed Spyro's potential characterization for Megatronic Legacy, so it's Gnasty's turn. My intent on Gnasty's characterization is maintaining much of his intellectual stature, but bringing in a more Thanos-esque storyline where his motives can be understood and not come off as a dork in school who got picked on for being ugly. I want to stray away from the typical evil tyrant trope for Gnasty, though a part of it will still remain as we're about to see. Gnasty, being a socialist, could mean he's working to keep his Gnorcs from being in a class-based society. He realizes that the dragons still believe that their capitalist system has been a thing for generations and plots a rebellion to break away from it. Beyond that, The dragons often poke fun of him for being the way that he looked. Gnasty was so grotesque that just looking at Jim's reflections causes the Gnorc to have heart attacks. He feels ashamed of his appearance, and despises the dragon system they established long before Gnorcs came to Dragonus Nui. He believes in equality, essentially giving the Gnorcs equal pay, opportunities, etc. However, he's met with a roadblock. He lacks the materials to deliver his promise. Because of his beliefs implying that there should be unlimited supply and handed to him for free, he'd have to do the exact opposite, which isn't something he's fond of doing to begin with. One possibility is that Gnasty could borrow said material to achieve his goal, but if we need to be more practical, then he could secretly work for other opposing factions to do so, trading some of his rations over machinery, metric, etc. Once he gets what he wants, Gnasty can prep up an army to fight the dragon system. Another possible trait that could make Gnasty seem more human is how Gnorcs are being treated. Now, it's not to say that they should be portrayed as weak, but maybe still have some legitimacy. They're not as capable of combat or labor as the dragons do. Because of this, a select few dragons, either it be Magnus or Bubba just to name a few examples, made fun of him. Claiming that the system is the best in all Millennium, the dragon's declaration is what drives Gnasty insane, to the point of starting his rebellion earlier than anticipated. Gnasty despises the more privileged beings, the dragons. Some time has passed, and Gnasty rallied his minions in a National Socialist-styled gathering. He declares war on the dragons. But before he could start on that, he needs to think of key strategies that would ensure his success. He needs to assemble a powerful frontal assault. Dr. Ship acts as a medical scientist. He could play a role in giving the Gnorcs temporary healing factors until they run out. Metalhead could act as a military commander to offer vehicles and weaponry to help Gnasty soldiers to fight off the dragons, and American army on Earth. Gnasty ends up succeeding in launching a surprise attack on the dragons, most of which being turned into crystal, but a select few dragons such as Nestor, Magnus, and Bubba flee away from their home planet, but not before having one baby dragon to carry to safety, Spyro. It would be sometime in the late 1960s and early 1970s, specifically 1969, when Gnasty Gnorc learns that a select few dragons went to Earth in refuge, and decides to go there. Realizing that those dragon refugees are living in America, as well as being the opponent to the Soviet Union at the time, Gnasty turned to the USSR for aid. Once he joins forces, he would help them if they agreed to aid him in delivering the dragons to him. No harm would come to them, except by Gnasty himself. More of a humanitarian warlord, isn't he? His connections with Dr. Shimp and Metalhead could play a major role in his leadership skills in the 1970s and 80s. Gnasty would need to trust him to deliver the performance at their most efficiency whenever possible. Dr. Shimp helps giving medical aid to the Gnorcs with healing factor gems, which would only last for roughly a few hours or less, depending on the condition of said material. Gnasty's tension would depend on the severity of events with him involved. Should anything go awry in his handlings or otherwise, his regime would spring into mayhem. With Spyro aligned with Reagan's American government, Gnasty joins forces with the Soviet Union's Leonid Brezhnev, who was leader between 1964 and 1982, and Yuri Andropov between 1982 and 1984. Gnasty Gnorc's ideology could contrast Spyro's. The young dragon lived the majority of his childhood under the care of Flan and Reagan, with the aspect that America is a symbol of freedom, individuality, and prosperity, whereas the Gnorc promotes regulation, eliminating labor, and making decisions for those under him, much like the actual Soviet Union in its lifetime. That way, we can see these ideologies, as well as their personalities, reflect on the factions they're fighting alongside with. There isn't too much to delve into possible roles for Gnasty Gnorc, given Megatronic legacy is still in its infancy, but it's a good starting point to develop the character further. Gnasty Gnorc, a ruthless, powerful, and cunning warlord amongst the Gnorc tribes. He creates warriors out of various kinds of precious jewels, crystals, and stones. Under his leadership, he unleashed an assault on the dragons over the system they built and seeks to build a liberalist society. Despite his brutish appearance, Gnasty is very intelligent, capable of creating his minions and practicing magic. With his scepter, a hammer with a shard, and a golden sickle. He's not as keen to fight in close combat, but will only do so as a last resort when his plans go awry. Following his successful overthrow of the dragons, Gnasty takes over the dragon realms with all of its resources, being hopeful that the Gnorcs can live without having to put up with a capitalist system the dragons set in place. However, in 1969, Gnasty Gnorc learned that a few dragons were still roaming free on Earth, including the baby dragon Spyro. He decides to travel there via a secret portal that Dr. Shimp and Metalhead found somewhere in an industrial island, and stumble upon Soviet Russia. It was there that Gnasty Gnorc arrives in the Soviet Union with a select few of his crew and got surrounded by the USSR soldiers. The Union's leader, Leonid Brezhnev, appears before them. In a meeting, Gnasty informs him that a select few dragons reside in America and will stop at nothing to claim them. However, Leonid informs him that the USSR is developing its targets across the globe and is seeking to tear down America. If the Gnorcs could help the Soviet Union conquer its enemies, they would be willing to capture the dragons, including Spyro, without any harm coming to them. It is March 1983, and Gnasty Gnorc devised a scheme that would win the USSR big. A crystal nuclear device capable of mass crystallization. No one dies from the crystallization yet, but it could bring mass production of resources using them, and it would raise stakes for America and Spyro. Now the conflict is set, a totalitarian socialist and a free-spirited dragon, going head-to-head with one another, with Flan allied with the latter. Both Spyro and Flan must stop him in Russia to prevent a mass crystallization bomb that could spread farther than any of USSR's bombs. Gnasty Gnorc was the first villain that Spyro the Dragon has ever faced in the series. He went from being a long-forgotten antagonist in the older games to having a place to be seen in the newer games, and has seen relevance in games such as Reignited Trilogy, Nitro Field, and Crash on the Run. Even merchandise was made for him. Fans often consider Ripto as Spyro's legitimate arch-enemy of the series. While there may have been some legitimacy in the case, the motivation of Gnasty Gnorc just seemed to feel more realized, given the dialogue the guy had when dragons were taunting the Gnorc. With Megatronic Legacy aimed for production at some point, this would make a good introduction with Gnasty Gnorc being the first villain to brace for the public view. Aside from the Soviet Union, of course. Thank you all for watching. This is Obscure Titan. Feel free to subscribe, and I'll catch you all next time. Over and out.